Mr. DeVille, I'm ready for my close up. My favorite professional wrestler of all time, Goldust, said those lines. And now I actually saw Sunset Boulevard, and I'm actually very happy that I saw this movie a few days ago because I'm a fan of old films, and actually Billy Wilder is one of my favorite directors. Like again, like with Stanley Kubrick, Stanley Kubrick's kind of considered the greatest director of all time. Or when a lot of people think classic films, it's usually Alfred Hitchcock and Stanley Kubrick, but Billy Wilder is one of those directors that has done a lot for filmmaking. Like definitely, I would say as like a third best like classic film director, you know, in American film, Billy Wilder is one of those things people need to review. He did some like It's Hot and The 7 Year Itch, the famous Marilyn Monroe films. He did The Apartment, won Best Picture, and he did Sunset Boulevard. And Sunset Boulevard was a very, progressive film. It's also a very, very disturbing film. And there's a lot of things that happen in this film. So I want to talk about, everything that I can remember about this, magna opus. So Sunset Boulevard is about this man named Jonathan, and it's regarded as a film noir and a dark comedy, but I more so see it as a psychological drama and a film noir. So it opens with him like dead in a pool, and you realize that the whole film is told in a flashback, and the whole film has like a bit of like a noir feel. Like how did we reach the point of him being dead? And that's actually kind of good because it catches you off tilter, and it also kind of really establishes like almost like an unsettling feeling. And sometimes with good stories, you always have to like kind of start it correct, really. And if if it starts at the ending, sometimes that's the best way to tell the story. So so what happens is that he's working as a writer in Los Angeles, and when he owes money to to a debt collector, I believe it's like the mafia or whatever. So what happens is that he's trying to avoid them because he doesn't want to get his car towed, because if he gets his car towed, he can't travel for work or anything like that. So in one scene, he is getting chased by them to not get his car towed, and then his car pops a flat. He goes into a mansion, and in the mansion, he meets this woman named Norma Desmond. So the first interaction is that Max, the butler, and Norma, they mistaken him for a cat for a person who works in a morgue, that person who takes care of like dead bodies and prepares them for funerals. That person, like an undertaker, I believe. And so she's talking to him about a casket, and then he just later on says, "No, you mistaken me for somebody else, really." And it's revealed that she has a monkey that died, and this is kind of like one of the first things we talk about, that Max the butler lives with Norma. And what happens with a lot of celebrities is that they're usually allowed to do a lot of antisocial behavior. Like they live with the butler kind of is paid to tolerate everything. And obviously her having a monkey, holding on to a corpse of a monkey, sets the tone that there's something really off with her. And definitely like maybe that metaphor of like, since there's a dead monkey, this is a monkey house, really, because you really see like how this becomes a bad environment, really. So and it creates an unsettling feeling. So like what happens is that afterwards there's an arrangement that they make, which is that she has a script that she wants to give to director DeMille, and and then what happens is that she's having him kind of edit the script and like perfect it for DeMille. And the things about Norma Desmond was that she was a silent movie actress, and she was like one of the big stars in Hollywood during the silent movie era. But as as they had more talkie films, and there are films that move towards like talking and color, she's kind of left in the past, really. And it's also later revealed that she was very, very hard to work with. So ultimately, she's somebody who's stuck in the past, really. Another reference they use is Great Expectations, which is a book by Charles Dickens. And in that book, there's a woman who gets held up, like she gets married, and at her wedding, her husband doesn't show up. So inside her like house, she has like all the food from her wedding. So it's like years and years after that. So all the food's like kind of rotten stuff. It's kind of about like how some people are stuck in time, and she's kind of in that way too, where she thinks she has like this dream of like coming back to Hollywood, and there's a couple of things that she forgets, that she's like way older. So obviously, like youth attracts really. The other thing too is that, and this happens in a lot of Hollywood, that there's a lot of sensitive ego. So there's a lot of people who don't realize that one of the reasons why people don't work with them anymore or have them on projects is because they're either like a film diva or they have a lot of antisocial behavior. So she's kind of like unaware of her behavior. And then the other thing too is that she's a bad writer. And there's a lot of like people who, like, I think like when we're younger, like when I was young, I wanted to be a writer. So I wrote a book, and I thought it was the greatest book ever written. And I wrote like a graphic novel, and I thought it was the greatest graphic novel written. I've done a couple of short films, and I thought that it would not take that long for me to make the greatest film ever made. So sometimes, when we get into writing or creative projects, we have this, mentality, especially when we're younger, that we're writing these masterpieces. And writing takes a lot of years. It takes a lot of discipline, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of hearing that your work is shit, and a lot of rewrites. Like they usually say that a good film has at least like 30 rewrites of the script. So if it's like 120, if it's a 120-minute movie, that's 120 pages. 120 times 30, that's roughly like 3,600, 4,000 pages. If you want to make it bigger and better, really. But she kind of has that that ignorance to think that she's writing like a great masterpiece. And also the other issue is that Max, the butler, and Jonathan, this guy who walks into her place, they don't have the courage to tell her that she's a bad writer, really. So that also happens a lot, where people don't tell people that they're unskilled, usually because they want to take advantage of him, like Jonathan does, like where he gets spoiled, where she spoils him. Like she's kind of like a sugar mom to him. And Max does it out of like, guilt, which is later revealed later on in the movie. So they start a working relationship, and over time they kind of develop like a bond, really. So like he like lives in her guest house, which is not part of the main house, like off in the yard, really. And then there was some flooding, so he actually gets moved into like the main house, and he's like next to her room, really. So it does kind of imply that maybe they have it's implied that they do have a sexual relationship, or like they become romantic with each other. So it's almost like a metaphor for saying like how that happens with dysfunctional relationships, or sometimes when two people who don't get along come together, that if you give them enough time, they actually will bond or fall in love with each other. And the other part of it is, I believe the woman's name is Betty. So what happens is that Jonathan meets this woman Betty a couple of times, and Betty is her fiance is friends with Jonathan. So he goes out to a New Year's party because he just doesn't like being cramped up in the house, and they actually start working on a script together. And what happens is that later on they develop an affair, really. So it kind of hints at a lot of things that happen in Hollywood, with how, like, again, there's people working together, or sometimes, when people are actors or in the film industry, they may be off like filming something for a couple of months, and then they marry, somebody else, or have a partner, man, woman, whatever gender, that's also into filmmaking, working on their own projects. So, when you're away on a project, you don't know if your other is seeing other people, working with other people. Is it just business, or is it business and pleasure? It becomes business and pleasure, really. So, and that's something that, is really honest about this piece, is that obviously Jonathan and Betty, if I remember her name correctly, they perform like a sexual relationship. They see each other at nighttime, so it's implied that, things are happening at nighttime, like that, like people talk about like the milkman and in the olden days, like how the milkman sleeps around, or how people are seeing each other at nighttime, just like in all those movies in the 80s, where you see like couples, where you see like teenage couples sneak out of the house and just hang out with each other. It kind of goes with that vibe that there might be something sexual, even though they kind of tell you that there's something sexual later on, really. But before that happens, Norma Desmond has a New Year's party in her house, really, and Jonathan is invited, and he assumes that there's other guests really. And what happens is a couple of things. That first of all, she pays. There's just a party, and it's actually set up for multiple people, but it's only just for Norma and Jonathan. So ultimately, they're dancing with each other, and he kind of, like I said, he just, went in the monkey house. You act like a monkey when Rome, you do what the Romans do. And he's like, like dancing with her. And it's also kind of like what I said, too. Like the people who are the musicians, they're just there to perform, really. Even though, like, these are, Norma has clearly some mental health issues, maybe borderline personality disorder, and some narcissism or depression and other issues. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. They're just there to be paid, really. So they're just playing along, really. And, there's cake, there's other items. Like I said, with Great Expectations, that it's not going to be touched. More than likely, it's going to be there to make it feel like a New Year's Day party and be thrown out, really. So that's also, like, things you see in Hollywood, like a lot of waste, really. Or sometimes you have these parties, and usually nobody touches anything. Or sometimes, it ends in a disaster or somebody's drama. And then they throw away everything just because they have the money to do that and just to make a scene, really. So what happens that he goes out. He goes out to a New Year's party. He meets Betty and her fiance, who's one of his friends, really. And what happens that he goes back because he finds out that she attempted suicide, so she cuts her wrist. And then again, this is good because in a lot of films at that time in the 50s, they didn't show suicidal tendencies, depression, other things like that. So again, it's good, like, honesty to say, hey, that's just, it wasn't something that we talk about in the past, like, 20 years. It's been around since the dawn of man. But it's good when early films say, hey, this is the reality of the situation. And I believe it's because he walked out on her, and then she got kind of worried that maybe he left for good, really. Or maybe she did that so he would come back. And also it's revealed through the film that she had suicidal tendencies. Like, she has a gun at one point in the end. There's no locks on the doors. There's no razors. There's no, like, items for her to hurt herself. Just like in a hospital, like how if there's a suicide patient, they get, like, paper bags and other things like that for the trash and other items. They just try to make sure that people are safe. Sometimes they take, like, the board rests and other things like that. Because I work in a hospital and that's what we deal with. So again, it kind of is what happened with a lot of times, like in the 50s and early on, where if somebody was well off and they had a mental illness or they're dangerous to themselves, usually the butler or the people would be their caretakers, and they wouldn't call it the lunatic asylum. They would allow them to kind of keep doing, like, living their lifestyle, really. And, like, Norma Desmond clearly needed a lot of psychiatric help, but also in the 50s, a lot of people didn't go to therapy because there was a lot of, like, taboos around it. It was really until, like, the 2000s where going to therapy was, like, widely accepted. Back then, it meant that you were crazy or insane, or your therapist will say, okay, put you in a straitjacket and we'll take all your money, really. So a lot of people avoided therapy, or when people were so wealthy and they had issues, people just ignored it because of wealth privilege and all that. So that happens, and then later on, what happens is that they continue to work on the script that Norma Desmond wants to work on, and then at nighttime, Jonathan sneaks out to work with Betty on another script, and Betty really believes that script that they're working on has a lot of potential. And there's a point where Jonathan, he does one of two things. Like, the first thing that he does is that it looks like he breaks it up with her and wants her to go to Arizona with her fiance. And I think it's because he didn't want to become, like, a love triangle. And then she's like, no, well, I actually love you. And it kind of is clear that she's like, okay, you know what? I want to abandon the relationship and the engagement that I have to be with Jonathan. Happens a lot in Hollywood, people sleep around, people work in close quarters, people are like, you know what, if there's something that they like, they go after it, because, Hollywood is about, putting yourself first or putting what you want first. That's just the Hollywood industry. And then the next thing that happens is after that, eventually they get the script done, and on Norma's script, Jonathan Norma's script, and then they go to Hollywood, I think, and they go to one of the studios. I believe it was Studio 58, and they meet Cecil B. DeMille. And it's also kind of revealed that that the studio is not interested in Norma's script. They're interested in her car because her car was kind of vintage. They can use that for old movies, really. So it's kind of like an allegory for how they see people like objects, really. Like, people only want to contact you if they have a use for you. Like, does Norma, does her looks, does she kind of fit a role that they can use? Just like Betty Davis. Like, Betty Davis was in a lot of films in the 20s and 30s, I believe. And then she was off for a while, then she came back when she could play the old Biddy thing. And that's kind of with a lot of people in Hollywood as well, really, where, like, where if there's a use for them, they allow them to come back. Or like in professional wrestling, like you see like a lot of wrestlers from like the 70s, 80s, and 90s. There's no use for them, but they come back later on to WWE because they're like, okay, we want to use you for like nostalgia, for nostalgia pops, or a blast from the past type of thing, really. Um, like that's kind of like you see that in that industry. So when they go to the studio, what happens is that you see kind of like how Norma reacts, where she's allowed to bring her car onto the property. She expects preferential treatment, and it's kind of hinted that that was one of the reasons why people don't work with her, is because she was kind of like a diva, really. And then Cecil B. DeMille, he kind of has an interesting relation with her because he does a lot of back talking of her, and it's kind of evidential that he sees her as kind of like a pain in the ass, really. And I think it's also revealed that he founded her when she was a teenager. Like, he was almost like a father figure to her. And that happens a lot in Hollywood, where sometimes people find stars when they're young and they develop like maybe a father type of relationship. And then, this happens like with Shirley Temple and a couple other stars like Brooke Shields. Sometimes there's like a Lolita thing, or sometimes there's a sexualized thing where it's like, okay, you're the hot young girl, you're the apple of my eye, so I like working with you and other things like that. Maybe there's sex behind closed doors, or there's kind of like, oh, well, you're the apple of my eye, so I want to work with you. I want to like film you all the time, really, because I'm obsessed with you. Just like in Lolita, where there are shots of the guy of Herbert Humphrey being interested in Lolita throughout that film, really. So maybe that was kind of their working relationship, but it's really hinted that he kind of like liked working with her despite her flaws, really, or maybe was attracted to how she looked, really. So there's a couple of things that happened when they were at the studio. So like there's a famous scene where she goes into the studio and people recognize her, and she gets attention for a short while, and that's kind of almost true about movie stars, like how they get attention for a short while. It's not forever, really. Like like Jack Nicholson. He retired maybe a decade ago, so it's almost like the light was on him longer. But then there are stars that are just popular for a few years, really, and then they're not popular anymore. Like for example, you look at the creators of South Park when they did South Park Bigger, Longer, Uncut. The light was on them for a very short while, then they went back to their own thing, really. So the light was not always on them. Just to give you an example of someone short term. Another great example is Eminem. You look at him, like when he made 8 Mile and then he won an Oscar, really, like that's an example of how light is on somebody for a short time. But there's other people like Jack Nicholson where the light's on him for a very, very long time. That's how Hollywood works. The light, you never know how long that light's going to be on you. So, but when it goes away, it hurts, really. And then that's kind of Norma Desmond. Like the light's on her, the attention's on her. But just like, time, the light goes off of her. And I think later on, like, she kind of talks about the script and she's insistent about working with him. And he kind of like, says, okay, well, think about it's going to happen, really. Just kind of sweet talk her into going away. And then Cecil B. DeMille is kind of like, telling somebody, I buy don't even contact her. Don't even contact about the car. I'll actually buy 5 replicas for you guys just so I don't have to work with her. So it kind of talks a little bit about two things, about like how two-faced people are in the film industry. Like he could be intentionally doing it to be mean to her, but it's more than likely he sees her as a pain in the ass. So he's like, well, I'm not working with that crazy bitch no more. And unfortunately, that's just how some people look at people that they work with in the film industry. Like ultimately they want to keep working with you. They'll do that. Once they have no use for you, sometimes the attitude is like, fuck you, goodbye, really. Or like when I worked in the 48-hour film project, Patricia Clark, the New Haven City producer, there's controversial articles about her, but one time she told me, screw you and fuck you is the philosophy filmmakers live by. Or most filmmakers are going to tell you, screw you and goodbye, really. So that's true. And that's kind of how he looked at her. Like he's like saying, I got no use for her, or remembers that she was a pain in the ass. Bye bitch, bye. That's kind of his mentality, really. And he goes back to working on his project. So ultimately, um, that's just how it goes in the film industry. So he goes back to the house, and it's revealed a couple of things that Max, the butler, was actually her first husband. So that's kind of interesting dynamic of the relationship, and it's good subtext because you're kind of like, oh well, that's just not really normal, or he must have a lot of regret from their marriage to actually really like kind of come back and be a butler and be a servant and do whatever she says. Really, that's an interesting dynamic. And then a little later on in the film, he continues to work with Betty. Norma gets jealous, and then what happens is that Norma tries calling her a bunch of times and tries to break things up. And then he's like, you know what? Jonathan's like, no, since you want to break up our working relationship, he invites Betty to their place and says, okay, this is who I work for, Norma Desmond, and kind of shows like what type of character she is. And if I remember correctly, what he does is he breaks it off with Betty and he breaks it off with Norma. And I think one of the reasons why he does that with Betty is because maybe because he knows that she's better off working with going back to her husband, because he knows that he's a bit of a homewrecker, the same way Norma was trying to be a homewrecker between her and Betty, between Jonathan and Betty, really. So he wants to break that cycle of homewrecking. So she has a gun in her possession. He walks out on her. She takes a gun, shoots him in the back. He falls into a pool, and then this is kind of like why I say like she might have borderline personality disorder. Like I had an ex-girlfriend who might have had borderline personality disorder. I remember talking to a psychiatrist because she did some very hurtful things to me and other people, and like he said, like she might have borderline personality disorder. Like I remember like she lied to me. Like we were together in high school. When I went to college, we broke it off. But I remember like how she contacted me in college, and she'd say things like she's being abused and beaten up by her current boyfriend. And then later I found out it was a lie, really. And then another thing that happened was that I found out, and her name's Christina Krampitz, by the way. I'll use her name. That she had a pattern of lying about being sexually assaulted on different men. Or I remember like one time when I was in a relationship with her, she would be high-fiving her mom and talking about like how she's happy that she put a restraining order on somebody. And another time she said something like she'd be happy if her younger sister died, so that way she and her mom she would keep all the inheritance. Like she wants her parents to die and her younger sister who's in her 20s to die, so she can kind of keep all the inheritance. Like definitely borderline personality disorder. So yeah, we were together in high school. But, then I went to college and then these things happened. I knew her for a little while and then, we just broke things off really. But I definitely knew many friends that she was in high school with. Like she had relationships outside, lied a bunch of times. And there's like been a history of her lying on different men really. And unfortunately, she's one of those women that will use the rape card if she has a bad relationship with men just to kind of get them in trouble. That's part of what borderline personality disorder is somebody who will love you a lot and then they'll do very vindictive things, or sometimes it can be murder, it can be lying about sexual assault, it can be like threatening suicide when people walk out, or other things. And I want to say that's not all people with borderline personality disorder. Like I have PTSD, depression, anxiety, self-hate, self-loathing. And there's been times that I've done the right thing and the wrong thing. But if I told you everything about my mental health struggles, or if you saw a film based on my life, really, you can't say, okay, well, that everything that the characters do or everything that I'm telling you that I did is a representation of all people with my mental health struggles. Everybody handles it differently. And unfortunately, Christine Krampus is somebody that handled it by destroying lives of other people, really, and having no qualms with it. And I don't mind saying the name of her because obviously if you're that horrible of a person, you need to be put on blast. And I know that's painful, but people need to be exposed for who they are, not go through life just hurting people and not facing any form of justice. So it's just to say, hey, this is just what this person's like. But to further talk about the film, Norma Desmond, she kills Jonathan, and then also another thing that happens at the end of the film, the police and the reporters are at her house really asking her about what happened, and what they decide to do is they're saying like, okay, she's in a room, she's delusional, she thinks that this is part of a movie or whatever, and the cops want her to come downstairs so they can put her in a maybe even a psychiatric van. You don't know, a psychiatric van, an ambulance go to a psychiatric hospital, or off to jail really. So what happens is that they kind of play along to kind of get her to come downstairs. So the director of this movie that they're doing to get her to come downstairs is Max the butler, and he's saying that, you're a princess, this is the palace. And then she says the famous lines, Mr. DeVille, I'm ready for my close-up, because she imagines Mr. DeVille being there. And she walks downstairs and there's lights and there's everybody kind of like, playing along with it while she's in her delusion really. So it's almost like, what we say about rich people and other people who have a lot of wealth as well really, where, sometimes they get preferential treatment. Sometimes people play along so they can later apprehend them. Again, if this was somebody who was poor, didn't have the same resources, they'll just drag her out and just do all that stuff really, kicking and screaming really. But they treat her with dignity, or having her play along really. I work in a hospital, so I remember like there was this woman who had dementia, and what happened was that she was saying that her wallet was stolen. So what the nurses did was get the police to kind of like calm her down by playing along with her. And sometimes like I was kind of saying that a little like too much, but I kind of get why they did that. And that's kind of the situation too, where they played along to kind of calm her down really and have a lot of patience with her. And that's what happened really. So it is kind of disturbing because, she committed a murder and she's so delusional that she doesn't, it's either that she forgot, or she blocks it off, or she doesn't really care what she did really. Like, and it seems like every other person, like while she did what she did, they're not holding her accountable for her actions, or they're letting her live out her dream of being a movie star. So there is a sense, and there's a disturbing sense of what you see is a lot of just, an ableism, or let a star be a star really, preferential treatment. So that's definitely very, very, very disturbing that that she was allowed to do that and have like that last like ride of vanity really. And if I remember correctly, the ending of the film, like the screen's all like kind of blurry really. And it's kind of like to do a couple of things. It's kind of like to make you kind of feel a sense of unsettling, because when things are kind of blurred out, you don't know the ending, or like how things are going to end after she's taken to jail, or she's going to be put in a psych ward, or how she's going to respond to negative articles about her. And then sometimes when people like are blurred out really, it kind of has a very eerie type of look. It has like a ghastly look. Like ghosts are kind of like blurry, or sometimes the stereotypical image of a ghost is a picture of a person that's all like blurry and in black and white, because black and white are colors of ghosts really, like the white and stuff. So she's almost like becoming like a ghost really, or kind of a more eerie type of figure really. So that's the whole movie of Sunset Boulevard. It's definitely a lot of commentary on mental health and how that was very overlooked. It's also a commentary on people who are so wealthy and they have a lot of just mental health issues, and they're not brought. They're not like, people let them live their lives despite what issues that they have, even though they're better off with mental health intervention. There's also things about, and about like, again, just like how times do change. Like when you are a celebrity, when you go through a lot of things like that in your life, really, like I said, you don't realize how long the lights are on you. And then the other part of this that I will say is that when they were at the studio, Max tells Jonathan, hey, all these offices were her wardrobe, and the bottom floor, like I had a room and everything like that, really. So it kind of talks about like how, now those are all offices, really. Just like about how times usually change. Really, it's almost like what happens with Roman emperors. Like each time a Roman emperor dies, all the statues of that emperor go down, and the statues of the new emperors go up. Really, or like I live in this apartment, and it's almost like the day that I die. Like my camera, my everything like that, will go into the trash, and then the next person will come in here, and they'll live, and I'll just be like nothing really. And that's kind of how it is with a lot of things really, where what you're part of an era, you're part of a time, and once that's done, really, it's on to the next thing, and then it's also really about like Jonathan's character, where he's looking for work in Hollywood, and it's by any means necessary. He works with Norma and tolerates Norma because he's getting all those payments, and then later on, he allows her to be a simp. Like she gold digs. She's a baby. She gives him like the mama's boy treatment or the sugar mama treatment, not baby's mama, sugar mama treatment. And he even tells like Betty he likes this gig. He likes using her like that, and that's really really hurtful. Then also talked a little bit about Norma and how she grows to be more violent and more desperate, and how again because she is allowed to do whatever she wants really, that that really it leads to a tragedy when she needs a lot of intervention. And then it also talks about Max, who was a former husband and also a butler, about how he does everything that she wants him to do without question really. So he almost goes through life kind of tolerating it. Like I remember like in the Boondocks, like Ed Wunsler, when he loses at like a video game system, he takes a gun, he shoots it into pieces, and then his butler just like comes in, cleans it up, and then puts in a new video game system. Like he's not gonna say like, dude, you need to talk to a therapist. Dude, you have PTSD from the Iraq War. Dude, you have anger issues and other issues. He's just gonna go along with just go along with the behavior really, and that's kind of how Max is with Norma, is that he just goes along with her behavior, and then it creates a lot of problems really. And then it also talks about Betty's character with how she has affairs, she cheats on her husband, she's interested in making money, and then ultimately with Betty, I believe she's also one of those people that are like, if there's a good idea, if somebody has great ideas, if they're like they have the Midas touch really, that's the person I want to be with. And that happens in a lot of relationships in Hollywood, where people are attracted to those who can go far really. Like, this is embarrassing for me to say, but I will say, but I remember when I used to do filmmaking in New Haven, I remember that I worked with a bunch of actresses, and some of that would lead to flings really. Like I remember I worked with this one actress who was like in her 50s, and she and when she was driving me home one time, she took me to a parking lot, and she wanted things to happen really, and things did happen, and then I remember like another time that there were a lot of just like women who were interested with me or wanted me to like fool around and play around with them, or go out drinking with them really. So that does happen really when there's a lot of people who people believe have a potential really, where a lot of people just gravitate towards that person. And sometimes it becomes like a harem anime, or sometimes with men, people are some women, and because it's been like a thing in Hollywood or whatever, is that some women are more attracted to men who have a future, have a direction, have potential, can go very very far really. And Betty kind of lives into that, where like she may see her husband as just an actor, or somebody who makes a bad decision by going to Arizona during like monsoon season in Arizona, if I'm using the term correctly, where there's a period in Arizona where it rains a lot, and she may see him as goofy. And then also her fiance is kind of goofy and kind of like quirky and a little too playful and a loudmouth, so she may be like, okay, he may be antisocial, he may not go as far as somebody like Jonathan, who knows how to write scripts and have great ideas, and ultimately knows when to abandon projects. He's working with Norma because it's financial security, but the art project he's working on is like, his lottery ticket to kind of get things, rolling for him. So, um, so yeah, it really is about all that stuff, So I do think that it's definitely, really unfortunate that that it is about how people use people, and also too, it made me really sad because I work in the film industry. I used to be a filmmaker, and it kind of made me think about like all the times when, like Norma, I've wanted relationships and friendships to continue, but I've had to realize that I had to work on myself, and people are just not going to tolerate me when I was going through antisocial phases. And I've learned, again, it's kind of a reminder of what happens when we're delusional. We want working relationships to continue and they don't work out. And sometimes it's because of our own behavior. Um, and sometimes it's also because we're around people who, at the end of the day, don't really care about us. They want what they want out of us, and that's that really. Like I remember, like I told the story a million times about how I did participate in the 48-hour film project, and they liked the fact that I would always participate, pay the entrance fee, and then it got to a point really where I did it for New Haven, my home city, and people were making comments about my skin color, and I think that they wanted me to be like the token black man, like, oh, we have like a black guy every single year, just like when you see King of the Hill, when Hank Hill was accepted into the Asian Country Club to look like they're not racist really. I complained about the New Haven 48, and it felt like I was stepping out of place, and then that's when they kind of just gave me bad experiences really. But I also was too naive to kind of understand that, my role with them was just to be the black guy who followed orders, really, when I'm actually mixed raced. And also, they were making comments about my skin color. Like, I remember, like, one time I did the New Haven 48, and people were saying, pointing their finger at me and saying, hey, it's great that a black man's doing the competition. And other people were saying, why do you want to work with just your group? Is that black people want to work with other black people? So I remember, like, how when I spoke out and I was vindictive and spoke badly, I regret kind of like picking fights and doing all that stuff, because even though I was trying to make a point, I regret losing all those relationships and those friendships, and I regret like not being part of the film community, because I think after that, and after I've kind of was self-destructive and more antisocial, I lost opportunity. So I remember feeling Norma in a lot of ways about how, it started with me standing up for myself. It started with me saying, hey, there are problems here, and it turned into allowing other people's negativity to push my buttons, and then I self-destructed, and then they kind of relative to my own self-destruction, really. So that happens in life where we regret when we have something and then it goes away. We regret working relationships coming to an end. We regret when we realize that we've been used and taken advantage by people, and people see us as loony or stupid, and people just see it as an easy paycheck, or people just see it as an object to be used. Like I remember, I worked with this filmmaker Sal Greco, who famously told me the last day I worked with him 9 months as a project, people use it more than you think by, and he was agreeing with the Cheshire Cat and other things like that, really. So there are very, very mean people. There's a lot of using, really. So, with Norma, and one of the answers of the movies, you can respond to like Norma, where you can respond to hurt by being more hurtful. You can respond to antisocial by being more antisocial. But you understand the film industry is an industry of sociopaths. It is an industry of hurting people to get yourself ahead, really. And Billy Wilder's vision is perfect because it shows that filmmaking is a sociopathic industry. It's definitely a very honest depiction about how it can, be a great industry for some, but long term, it's a great industry for some. But a lot of times, it is an industry of being heartbroken, and that heartbreak can lead to, just mental breakdowns and insanity, really. So, when you are in the film industry, these are good films to watch, really, to be like, okay, no matter what, understand it is a very cutthroat, sociopathic industry, and it is an industry of being used. So either be resilient, or when the lights are not on you anymore, when people move past you, know how to move past it, or else you become like Norma Desmond on Sunset Boulevard, which is another way of saying, the sunset there's always a sunset on people, even on the Boulevard of Hollywood.